Welcome, guys. The following session comes from a live Twitch 25NL coaching session where we had one student, aka Shocked Chris, playing live in front of two coaches, yours truly, and of course the Indian destroyer Akshar Patel, who is a strong poker player and coach that plays professionally. So you're going to see Chris navigate his way through a few spots and then get brutal feedback from both of us at the same time. It's going to be a barrage of educational content. Hopefully it will apply to loads of you guys that play these stakes, that play 25NL or 50NL, and I hope you enjoy it. Let me know what you think in the comment section. Let's get into it right now. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a coaching stream. We have me, Pete Clark, your host for today. We have others. Speak others.
Hello, am I others?
You're one of the others.
Yeah, you can't. You got to name them, otherwise we both speak at the same time.
No, you're called others in the stream, though. You don't get names today. You're just others.
Fab. How are we all?
Excuse me. Sorry.
How are we all? That answers it.
Everyone.
That answers it.
Everyone in chat who is sick, welcome. We are all sick as well.
I'm not sick. I'm almost fully recovered from COVID.
Should we play some hands?
Yes.
That was really useful. That was really interesting.
Akshar, to what extent do you do sort of mental game work with your students?
I normally do like as and when we need. To be fair, the students I have haven't got super mental game leaks right now because
I mean they must have to have hired you in the first place, right?
Yeah, I agree. That is a mental game leak. That's for sure. One of the advantages of coaching people that mostly play live poker is that they will have less mental game leaks in the sense because they have a crutch, which is that their opposition is so weak that they will experience less variance in general.
And they play full ring, which has a lower standard deviation compared to 6 max.
Exactly.
Does it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Standard deviation for full ring's about 60. For 6 max, you're looking about 80, 75, 80. Heads up about 100, so it's really different. Yeah.
What makes that the case? What?
Because if you think about standard deviation, it's a measure of variance plotted through time, right? Volatility over certain time frames. So if you look at full ring, a lot of your hands are played in an environment where you fold more pre-flop, you're not involved as much. So as you play hands in full ring, there are less swings because more of your hands are just not being involved in the pot. Whereas heads up, the other extreme, you're involved in like every single hand that happens, right? So basically it's a lot more swingy, temporally speaking, hands per hours, per fluctuation.
It's way less swingy for ring because like if you think about your under the gun, like you have 3 more positions where you play like less than 80% of the deck or whatever. So if you think about that, like conceptually, you are not in as much of a rush because the blinds are not coming round to you nearly as often.
Right, that's a good way to put it. All right, we have a hand.
We do have a hand. I'm just going to check multi-way. The reason I think check or bet is okay, but I'm a bit unsure whether bet is okay because I think there's a lot of potential to get raised and all this type of stuff, and I think I might make check better. I think it's still optional though, but I am now going to start rolling it because I think it is absolutely fine. I think on a 69, I'm going to check. I think I would have bet half pot would be my sizing. Okay, now I have the flush. I think now it's almost mandatory. I would now say it's closer to mandatory than it is like a check call or anything.
I have a few things to say in this one, so that's good. All right, so on the turn, I agree that like if you were to somehow be able to run like a theoretical spot 3-way here, you'd probably see this just checking a lot and sometimes betting like a third. I think it would be quite... maybe there could be some bigger sizes too, but I think there'd be a lot of betting a third. I think there'd be a lot of checking. There might be some bigger betting, something like that. We could then simplify that or talk about how to simplify that to one size. I think it's worth going into that here. And my main feedback for you here is that you could have asked the next step. Let's say this, right? Question 1. Where is it really important to do the sort of Phil Galfond thing that Akshar was quoting there? Or was it you that was quoting it?
I was quoting it, yeah.
Where every spot is a decision to make the best choice. Well, it's most important to do that where one line is better than the other. Now, where is one line likely to be better than the other to the greatest extent? Like, where is it most likely that one of your options is much better than another? Probably not in some really mundane theoretical spot, but more in like a wild jungle, real world spot, like 3-way on 3 flush 3 straight, right? That sounds to me like a spot where one line is likely to be better than another because the imbalances that you will come across in that terrain are just way more widespread and of a greater magnitude. So therefore, instead of stopping it, this is optional, you could say this is optional in theory, done. Okay, that wasn't difficult. I have lots of my time bank left. But how do I expect them to differ, in their play from how theory would? So if you check, do you expect it to be overbluffed or underbluffed by the combined enemy? And if you bet, do you expect them to over defend or under defend? So if you ask those two questions, you'll be able to maybe actually see a front runner play here, even though theory might not give you one.
So if I thought it was likely to be under bluffed and under defended, does that make bet better than check?
It's unclear, right? Because under defended means your value bet isn't so great. But what this really comes down to is what is the usefulness of the fold equity. And I think with your hand, it's there's some usefulness to fold equity, but not like masses of it, but some, because it's three-way. But basically, my thought of it is this. If you think it's significantly under bluffed, checking will just become way worse. And that's because a lot of the money you're meant to make here is people just betting with gutters and queen X and, one club hands and things like that. So if you think people are going to be too passive here and just not have hands they can bluff with very often here or feel comfortable bluffing very often, it's very likely that betting is better. I do actually disagree with the idea that this is under defended if you bet. Okay, let me say this. If they get here with too much nothing, then yes, frequency-wise, they fold too often to a bet. However, what really matters here is what they're calling and what they're folding as well, not just how often. So if we're going to say that when they have a 9, if you bet half pot, they probably call too often with like ace 9. I think that's actually true. Like I think
I
in
would
theory,
agree.
ace 9 or king 9 or something should be like indifferent already and folding a lot here to a bet, right? Because it's three-way. But I don't think a fish will do that. I think a fish will just like have second pair, see only one bet, call like pretty frequently. So actually, I'm a big fan of betting here because I think it's chronically underbluffed if you check, and I think if you bet, while you'll get a lot of fold equity from trash that's not bluffing anyway, that doesn't really matter because when they have a worse jack, a 9, a pair plus draw, I think they'll actually station a bit too much here because the hand looks a bit better than it is in this texture, in this environment. So I'm a big fan of bet here for that reason. But your question is really good. If it's overfolded and also underbluffed, what becomes better? There you have to dig in a little bit more into the nature of the fold equity, how useful it is, and what hands are actually doing what. It's a really complicated spot, actually. But anyway, my main feedback is spend time assessing how that spot's different from theory, because it will be very different from theory, because it's a weird spot.
And then on the river, I then felt it was basically, by this point, it was mandatory
Absolutely.
to
really
bet.
underbluff situation by combined enemy. You're not going to make anything by checking. You maybe shouldn't check this hand in theory anyway, I don't think. And therefore you should bet. Sizing wise, my only issue is that when you go near pot into two people and they do still have some better hands in their range, you might struggle for this to be the highest EV play. It's not that it no longer functions as the value bet, it does, but I'm much more of a fan of like block here or something like that, because I think the bluff catchers they have that you beat are mostly non-flushes, right? They don't have a lot of lower club here because the jack, 8, and 6 are already out. The 10 will have bet the flop a lot. They just don't have a lot of lower flush here. So, and you will sometimes just run into like ace 9 with ace of clubs or like some nut flush or something occasionally. So I really am a bigger fan of block here than I am of this sizing with this spot. I think your equity,
it's weird though. It's interesting. The bet is B75, but it looks like
it looks like it's huge. Yeah, but I think even B75 is a bit big because while you have enough equity to make this bet, if they're defending often enough, I think they'll overfold to such an extent to the sizing that as a combined unit, they will really overfold this spot. So such that you should use a smaller value bet, because it's about value betting isn't just a function of your landing equity. That's a great starting point. You know, how much equity have I reached the spot with? Fantastic starting point. But what happens after I bet? How does the contraction in villain's range match up to the contraction in theory? And my opinion here is that the contraction is greater, and therefore you end up isolated against hands that beat you a bit more often in practice than you do in theory, and therefore the way to like make sure the sizing is optimal is to use a slightly smaller sizing. And that's the thing, as Figaro says, like, yes, we bet turn because a lot of worse calls. That's also the case in theory, yet theory can make arguments for why you should check, right? Whereas you can't, because your situation, well, you can, but they're not as strong. So theory could say, yeah, if you bet a lot of worse calls, you can value bet. However, not that much worse will call because they're meant to like not station. And if you check, they're meant to bluff and you make money that way too. In practice, we were saying that doesn't happen enough. But yeah, we went into a lot of detail there for that one hand, but I think it was worth it.
I'm just simplifying to range bet here. See, this is where I'd like to understand the theory more, if that makes sense. Like, they've condensed, I've polarized, but this is where I have too much of a leap where I think bet is still okay, and I am just going to keep going because I think they overfold. But like, this is the kind of perfect type of spot where I'm going to end up making a triple. I don't know enough. I think overbet is the size. I think I'm saying I've got like a really good hand at this point. And anyway,
I have a few things to say. I thought it was interesting the wording you used on the flop and turn.
Yeah.
So you said, I'm just gonna, what did you say? I am just going to.
Yeah, I'm simplifying to range bet on the board.
Yeah, it's simplified to range bet on this board, which I think is a good strategy. I just like you to be a bit more confident in yourself and just be like, I'm range betting this board. Like you don't need to qualify it. I think you're good, and you can have some trust in your own strategy, and I think it's a good strategy. So I wouldn't really worry about it too much. So yeah, turn's interesting. I think you said something like I've condensed. No, he's condensed and I'm polar. Right,
more
you said
polar.
Something like that.
Yeah, mate, you're absolutely right. I would have to watch it back, but if I wasn't gradable in it, then absolutely.
No, it's not the gradability. It's just that you haven't done anything yet. So I don't know if you're actually polar yet, because like you bet your entire range, right?
Yeah, that's a really
interesting point. You still have sixes, so you're not. Nothing's happened like in that sense. Like you can say that he's probably more condensed. I can agree with that, but like you haven't bet anything, and then you're asking like, should I bluff this spot or is this hand a good bluff? Honestly, I couldn't tell you off the top of my head.
So if your hand was...
I'm probably not gonna bluff this.
King 4, yeah. So according to the solver, it's on screen just now. There's a small EV loss, not very big, but like a fifth of a tenth of a big blind. So like 2% of a big blind EV loss by bluffing hands like King 5, King 4. The idea is that they're blocking some of the King high 10, King folding 9, range. Yeah, like a little bit. Yeah. Well, King 10 actually calls again, so that's not such a big deal.
To overbet?
Oh, no, I didn't know, but we're B75ing. This one. King 10 calls again. It's a bluff catcher. Almost,
yeah, I guess it is.
And it's got redraw, right? So it calls again. But the idea is that these hands, these king high hands, they just have a little bit too much pot share. They don't have much pot share, but they have a little bit too much. They're doing a little bit too well. They're blocking a few folds. Whereas a hand like Jack X, like Jack 5 of your suit, would be bluffing a lot. And the idea with that is that bet is the same as check with that, but with the king, check is slightly better than bet. So in equilibrium, you're deviating a little bit, and it's because the board is so dry. See, if you made that board a bit wetter, a bit easier to connect with, king high would drop down to being like very low showdown value, and it would no longer be such a bad blocker because villain wouldn't have called any king highs on the flop and wouldn't now be folding them on the turn, really. But because the king X now has that tiny smidgen of like chop EV with other king X on many rivers, now it's slightly better to check than to bet. However, if you're right that this is like overfolded, then it could still be better to barrel the hand than to check it, right? It could well be.
I was going to say that too. I think in reality, it might be a little bit better to triple this off if we think they're going to fold too much ace-x on the river.
Right. So Akshar and Chris can actually see
I can't see
the screen right now, right? So I just want to make that clear. You can't see the solver. So I'm going to ask you guys, how often do you think Pool is folding a hand like 5, 6s, 7s, 8s to this turn bet?
Close to always.
Close to always, right? That was that's my inclination as well. Chris, are you in agreement with that? It's, right. Yeah. So 7s, for example, is only meant to fold about 70, 65% of the time, something like that. So I think based on the fact that the pocket pair region basically folds too often, I think based on the fact that the Queen X region isn't there often enough because it's raised flop, I think you're absolutely right that this is overfolded. I also think a hand like King... Oh, actually, King... No, I was wrong. Sorry, King 10 does fold the turn when it's not straight.
Yeah, you can't sustain...
No. I mean, it's close to a call. The call is basically break even, though, right? It's basically break even.
Fair enough.
But yeah, it's super close. Against Chris, you should call the King 10 on the turn, actually.
I'm worried I have that reputation
on because
stream.
you're blocking his King High bluffs.
Off stream,
you're blocking his King High bluffs.
Off stream.
Bluffing King 4.
That's blocker's gone mad. But yeah, I mean...
Off stream, I'm pure value.
The fact is that pure bluffing a hand that should never bluff is more important than your blockers.
Everyone watches my streams and like, Chris just bluffs so crazy. On the river... I was trying to work out, without getting too bogged down in the middle of the hand, what my sizing scheme would be. And I think it would just have to be like really strong value hands still betting at this point, if that makes sense. Like, I feel like I'm going to check a lot of my ace-x, like ace 10. I don't think I'm betting. I think I'm just checking. And so basically what we're saying is like, I'm unsure where to place ace king, if I'm honest, but like ace queen is obviously incredible. Ace jack is now, well, ace jack is not, doesn't matter, it's not two pairs, it's the pair that plays the board. But like I don't know. And so I thought that actually the hands that are going to be value betting are predominantly going to be almost trips plus, and therefore I'm going to go.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, absolutely.
That's 100% how you should be
right.
This
and I would say just having B75 as the main sizing with some overbet would be okay. I mean, solver's going all in with like aces when it's unblocking the queen and stuff like that at some frequency. Final thing I want to say is though, because this Jack River is so infinitely better for your range than his, anytime you have something that's not a busted flush draw, like your hand, you should just blast. So really good river bet. You must bet river in theory and even more so in practice.
There we go.
I think you played this river really well. I was unsure about turn, but I was like on the river, if you don't blast it, I'll be very upset because like you don't have clubs, which is great. You have good queen X blockers with the king of spades and the four of spades. So you block queen four of spades and king four of spades and ace four of spades, which are potential bluff catchers. They probably overfold an ace to the river overbet anyway. So like I don't see how this could ever be like. If you think about it this way, when you check, you win 0% of the pot.
Yeah.
Or you sometimes beat 5-6 of clubs, let's say, but not really.
Can you imagine?
Yeah, exactly. So like this overbet just makes complete sense. And I really don't care that much what theory says about king four on the turn. Like Pete said, like how often do they fold under pairs on the turn? If it's high enough, then definitely just want to like blast.
But I think that's what I say. Pete was here. I think that's the nuance that eventually I would like to get better at, the understanding. Because I was saying, I think bet is better here. And so that's what I'm going to do. But I can't tell you why, if that makes sense. Like if you were to say at the end of this year, I would be able to say the pocket pair region should call a little bit here, if that makes sense. But I think pool doesn't. And therefore, I think this swings king four into a bet. That would be like the dream goal for me explaining this hand, if that makes sense. And so being able to do that would be incredible.
So all you have to do is think about what you're trying to achieve when you bluff the turn. So like you think about what continues on the flop. He's going to continue most pairs, queen X, ace X, and some king highs. And then on the turn, like what part of his region are you going to fold? And then on the river, when you overbet, what part of his region? So like on the river, you'll need him to fold some ace X, right?
Yeah, and I would have intuitively been able to say that we're basically I my language might get sloppy, but I'm basically saying that like I want to him to think that I've got better than an ace, if that makes sense, and therefore
pretty much
fold it. Yeah, no, interesting though.
Yeah, I mean, you play that hand really well. I'm looking at the sim and I want to see if P gets to the river. No, he didn't. That's on shame.
Yeah, well, P felt in theory and in practice it was mandatory to go once you had it.
I'm just curious, like once you do overbet or bet big on the river, like
I think that's
how much ace X folds?
That's an interesting question that I'm actually maybe I'll wait for Pete to come back, but it's about I'm going to make a note.
You can ask me if you want.
No, I almost don't want to have the conversation twice. But basically it's where does he if the overfold happens on the flop, do we almost need to be in a situation where they overfold again, if that makes sense? Because if they end up on the river with a stronger range, and that's the point, but it's it's understanding trying to get better at understanding situations where, like, is there ever, for example, on the jack, I can feel that, as Pete said, this card is much better for my range and all this type of stuff. And so I can see them overfolding again. But let's say that card is a 3. Are we now in a world where they've overfolded their pocket pairs and stuff on the turn, and so they don't have them to fold? Are they overfolding again? Or how do we think about that, all that type of thing?
Well, what you want to do is I would stop worrying about if they're overfolded and start thinking about your hand and like what kind of pot share your hand has. So like if your hand just has no pot share, then does it really matter that it's overfolded or not? It just matters that can you turn this 0 EV hand into a plus EV bluff? And if you can't, then you just want to give up. That's when overfolding.
But the only way it would be, so what would make it a plus EV bluff? What are the factors? How would I turn this 0? What's the factors that turn this 0 EV hand in with check, which I would agree 0 EV, no pot share? What are the factors?
It might have some pot share, like I said. Like if you can justify 6-5 of clubs, 4-5 of clubs, 3-4 of clubs, maybe it has some pot share, right? So like I'm not thinking about this hand as 0 pot share, but like I'm thinking, okay, what sizes do I have to use to turn this into a plus EV bluff? Maybe I have to go all in. Maybe I have to go 2x pot. Maybe I have to go 3x pot. Maybe 75% doesn't do it. So let's say the river was the 6 of diamonds. I don't think I can just be 75 and get him to fold all his ace X on the river. Like I just don't think that's going to be plus EV. I think that's a negative EV bluff. So if there's no size, can I use a size that is overfolded more? Can I put more pressure at 25 NL? Like is he going to crumble with his ace 10 and ace 5 if I go twice pot? You know, things like that. Like that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, and there's also the fact here that he's got too much ace X, right? Because like too many other hands have played differently before now. So a queen will mistakenly raise turn sometimes. It shouldn't. Or it may raise flop pure, even though it should mix, and like pocket sevens will overfold, as we've said earlier. Therefore, villain is reaching the spot with a disproportionate amount of ace-x that'll also under-raise flop. So there's way too much ace-x here, so I don't want to go down the targeting route because you know how much we hate targeting in this in this community. But when somebody's range is like bulbously disproportionately full of a certain type of combo, if there is a way to cause that combo in greater pool to make a large mistake, then that may well be the best line. And I'm basically saying targeting without saying targeting here, because targeting is such a horrible thing.
Well, what we're trying to say is that we're basically playing against his actual range, you know? So
right.
Like real range, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. So his real range has like, let's say, a lot of ace-x. So we're just playing against that. How do you play against a range that is condensed to ace-x? You know, he's capped to one pair, let's say, and against that range you'd make massive overbets. So it's not even targeting at that point, it's just playing against his range.
So yeah, I think like river, just because they overfolded turn doesn't mean they won't also overfold rivers to certain sizes, as Akshar says, right? So it's very possible that if your range is just too much ace-x, that you overfold on turn because you didn't have enough queen in the first place and because you folded your sevens too often. But then on the river, once you face overbet, you don't bluff catch ace-x enough to overbet and that you overfold again. Of course, if you were to bet third pot on the river here, probably they still overfold because they like level themselves with a bad ace or something. I don't know, maybe not. But obviously sizing is really important. So the solver may say when you're bluffing you can either overbet or you can b75, but the solver's trusting its solver opponent to start mixing appropriately with ace-x against b75, you know, to fold. I don't think actually that they're gonna like station all ace-x to b75. I think you can
no, they won't
get an ace to fold to that like quite often too. But what you're saying is right. Is there a size that's actually even better? As Phil Galfon's, you know, keep quoting him today, every node is a chance to, or every street, as he said, is a chance to make the best decision, and it's unlikely that b75 and overbet have the same EV here, and maybe you can figure out which one is better. But you should definitely.
Yeah, I'm not saying one is better than the other. I'm just saying like you can expand. Like I think one thing that especially I've heard from my live students is people don't overbet, especially in live poker, is because it's unethical. Like it's no limit hold'em. So
it's unethical.
No, seriously. Like that's what he told me. He was like, people find it unethical like if you bet like more than 100% of the pot. It's like rude almost. Like, and we can like 150 here, or like expanding your ability to go like just think about, oh, maybe I can go 3 times pot. I have ace queen aces, and you know, like I have these hands that want to do it. So why not? You know, and as long as you understand that this is the fold equity you need when you use 2x pot, like you need however much fold equity. I think it's 66%. And and just thinking, well, am I going to get more than 66% here, or am I going to be better off using 75?
With a hand like this, you should be shooting for more fold equity than that, because this hand is actually innately profitable as a bluff in theory. So breaking even with it would actually be a very bad result. So if you got 66% fold equity, the 2x pot bet here would suck. Yeah, I think actually if you bet 2x pot here, you get like 85-90% fold equity. You
definitely would.
The more I think about this spot, the more I think like the bigger sizes like all in are just really overperforming at these stakes, because like for example, bringing this up on the solver just one more time, if you go all in on the river here, and it might not be a play that's on your radar, but there's actually no reason why it shouldn't be on your radar. Like ultimately, right, when you've worked on it, they do need to call you with an ace sometimes. Like ace 3 is calling like a good amount of the time. Certain aces are almost pure folding, but they have to get call happy with an ace at some frequency, and they also have to call a queen the majority of the time that they have it, and they have to have a queen in the first place. All of that's considered. I think they fold close to, they're meant to fold 80% to all in here. I think it's 90 plus. I think that could be the best size excess fold equity wise, and excess fold equity is of course what matters the most when you're finding the right bluff size. To which sizing does villain have the biggest excess or the smallest deficiency in fold equity? And that will guide you. Obviously, if there's a big deficiency either way, then you shouldn't be bluffing. But yeah, that's not the case.
I think I was saying to Akshar while you're away, people, I think it's helpful for you to hear. I think for me, the biggest point that I would like to improve on in that hand is probably on the turn, because it was kind of, I felt like it was better to bet than to check, if that makes sense. But I think being able to identify that, basically being able to say that, you know, they should be calling some pocket pairs to this, and I don't think they do, and therefore I think this bet will overperform. Yes. That's the why. That as if I was, you can say that within the time bank, if that makes sense. Like if you imagine I was really switched on and dialed in and just like super strong, I would be able to say that like probably in theory this bluff is probably like close to break even, but actually I think they overfold their pocket pairs because they should have them from the flop, and therefore I'm going to bet. Like that would be much stronger or whatever, I think. And that's where Akshar's better than me at poker, so that he was able to say, oh, well, you can just think that when you bet the flop, they're meant to continue ace X, queen X, pocket pairs, and king high, and then on the turn, what are those? Are they're going to overperform. But I'm not at that point yet, if that makes sense. And
it's
that's
like having that range of geographic understanding, like being able to, I think for a player of like my experience or Akshar's experience, we're able to look at the flop and be like, right, we can almost just feel out the calling range here. Like you could put your hand into a bag and like pick out an object by its feel. We can like just know that that's what that feels like. It's like a very rough subconscious idea.
You just put yourself in his spot, right? What would you call him?
I know. And
that's it.
No, it's really helpful.
But
and
even that extra step of just being like, what would I call? That's if that's not in unconscious competence, if that's a conscious exercise, then it's detracting from what you're able to do in your allotted time window. And yeah, you have to get on with it. And you also have to make your mouth and your vocal cords move so that sound comes out and all of that shit as well. So it's not easy.
No,
thinking and moving vocal cords are the same thing, but they weren't always. That's just because I've done this job for like a decade, you know.
Pete, are you just the Scottish version of me? You like literally everything I like.
I like card games, chess, badminton.
Racket
I wouldn't
sports,
say I like running, but I do it. Like,
I don't like running.
Same with like swimming, and I like cycling a bit more than I like the other ones. I
think this person's called a 3-bet.
Yeah.
And I'm trying. I check the flop because I don't think I get 3 streets of value, and so I in those type of hands, I prefer to check back the flop with this hand. But now I think I do, and obviously the river is great. I wonder what my size would be here. I think I just keep it simple and B75. Bizarre situation.
All I can say is I think you could have gone greedier.
You think that's what I was wondering about that one.
Is it fish? Okay, tens. Okay.
Yeah, interesting.
So you said you don't think you can get 3 streets of value. I don't really know what to say to that in the sense that maybe you can, maybe you can't. But like I think it's a bit assumptive because you should already be thinking like this guy's obviously a weaker player because he cold called a 3-bet, and then you want to like range him based on that. So like, what kind of range cold calls a 3-bet? Like, what do you think? What do you think it's going to be?
9s, 10s, jacks.
Yeah.
There will be like suited combos for people, but I'm not as good at saying those, if that makes sense. Like
but there'll be like ace jack, ace queen.
There'll be offsuit ones as well, right? Like, some people
cold
call like ace king off, ace queen
ace
off,
king
like,
off,
things like this. Yeah.
I would start there, and then maybe you don't have 3 streets, maybe you do, maybe this board doesn't allow it.
So saying I don't have 3 streets is another good example of overly binary thinking. It's not totally binary, but it is definitely too binary because if the board runs out deuce, then you probably do. If the board runs out queen something, then you do. And if the board runs out king, then you definitely do. So there are worlds where you can get 3 streets. Your hand doesn't always remain static and it doesn't always get worse. So one of the reasons that we bet flop at this SBR a lot here is that when the board does run out amazingly for you because you hit trips or something, like you started building the pot, and it's much better for you to have done that than to not do that on those branches of the tree. So I kind of agree with Akshar here, but I think checking flop, the problem with it is it's not a situation where you can cause villain to dramatically overstab hands that wouldn't have just called flop anyway. So like, what if we say, okay, if I check back, he'll lead queen 10 too often. Like, who gives a shit? Because that calls your flop bet, right? Or if I check back, he'll call 10. He might bet 10s. Sure, he probably won't, but if he does, that would have called a flop bet all of the time, so it would still have been better to bet flop against 10s. So sometimes I like this thought experiment. Imagine villain has a certain exact hand. How would you play, right? So if he had exactly ace jack, king jack, 10s, 9s, queen x, you would bet. And if he had 6s, you would check, but it would be kind of close actually, because I don't think 6s are going to bluff turn that often on this board, so maybe taking the 2 out protection is okay. So actually, I can actually flip over very many combos here against which I want to check. I can flip over loads against which I want to bet. So even though you won't get 2 streets and all runouts, that's not actually a sufficient reason or close to a sufficient reason for choosing check over bet on this flop. So I think betting small here is the best play.
Yeah, fair.
Even if you're right, let's say you're right that you can only get 2 streets. Maybe those 2 streets are flop and turn or flop and river.
Right. And that will come down to how often villain overstabs hands that wouldn't have called flop specifically. If most of the overstabbing comes from hands that call flop anyway, then you should bet flop usually. That makes sense. So again, it's about asking like what kinds of hands are here and what. Okay.
And then Akshar on the river, you considered being a bit more greedy.
Oh, I think turn you can like just go
okay.
Okay. I know we're playing like toolkit like 75.
Yeah.
I think that's very useful against regs, but against a fish, I'm like, what do I think his range is? And at this point, once he's checked twice, I think his range is mostly jack x, 9s, 10s, 8x, and air. and I'm not really looking for him to bluff his air. I don't think it's going to happen that often. So I'm literally just going as big as I can on the turn and to like go as big as I can on a lot of rivers. I don't know if Pete agrees with that.
Yeah, I think that's
disagree with
reasonable.
that.
I mean, I don't feel massively strongly about it, but I think I agree with you that like if you had to choose the true EV, say whether pot was better than B75, then probably pot is better. There's just but remember, Villain Chris is more capped than he should be here, right? He's not checking the sets and bolts and slow plays as often. And then we have the idea that Villain is just not going to check raise enough, not going to have a hand that beats you enough. So actually, your hand that's 80-something% equity in theory is actually 90-something% in practice. And there's some making up for lost ground going on here where you didn't bet flop, you could have. Now you have the chance to like make the pot bigger. I think this pot I agree with Akshar that this pot has probably remained too small against an opponent that's overly capped, not raising you, not bluffing you when you bet smaller, and just kind of probably too inelastic to the difference between B75 and B100 or something like that. So you could like pot turn, pot river here or something like that. Looks really good to me.
Yeah, something like that. Because I mean, we don't want to take what happened as like confirmation bias, but like he kind of called pretty quickly with a hand like tens, right? So it's kind of unlikely that he's gonna fold like
you
a
got
jack.
Ace King. I put you on Ace King, mate.
Yeah, that's fish logic. You've got Ace King, so you 3-bet, you got Ace King. Like he just puts you on whatever hand he wants to make his logic convenient. So like I would have liked to see all the money go in somehow by the river, but oh well. So
yeah, or maybe not even all the money, but more money is
a lot
the
of the
key
money.
point.
Yeah,
More of the
a
money.
lot of the money.
Maybe all of the money, maybe more of the money, but more of the money.
So Villain Donks is actually is probably like absolutely fine. I think my combo has to continue. Ugh, so I feel like this is more merged than it should be. And the question is therefore, do I raise more? Oh, I think I do raise more. Oh, it's really tough. It's not tough anymore. That's an interesting hand.
I think you were right in what you said, but your actions were wrong.
I agree. I was making my face that I make because I was really, really perturbed by this turn raise, and I'd like you to figure out why, Chris. Why was I like squeamish about this turn raise?
Well, I mean, you must not feel like I have the fold equity.
Not so much that, but let's think other branches. Remember that this node on the tree is like you're on a branch of the tree, and then it branches off in other directions, right? So let's think forward to like the way it could branch off now, and what's going to go on here. Clue, buzzword, SPR. So how would Villain having 42 bigs change the frequencies of certain responses to your raise, and what would that mean?
You think I face shove too much?
It's extreme danger zone. Remember danger zone? It's extreme danger zone. So when we talk about this in CPS, right, Carrot Poker School, when we raise here, we reopen the action, whereas when we call with showdown value and loads of lovely redraw and way more equity than we would ever need to call, we're very profitable. When we raise, we're profitable too, but then the jam comes, and then like, what do we do against the jam? Like if we call, it's close to 0 EV. If we fold, it's close to 0 EV. There's a plummeting effect to our EV when we face that branch, and that's fine if we almost never face that branch, because the spot is one where we have like a reg opponent, an SBR where he can't jam, and if he calls, we have implied odds, we can call. If he raises, we have implied odds, and we can call that raise with loads of money left behind. That's fine. But when you have 0 implied odds against a jam that's coming frequently, and the jam is a very sort of amenable option for Villain due to SPR, stack size, you're inviting a line that crucifies your EV, and you're inviting it fairly frequently, and that's the issue with the raise here. It reopens a branch that doesn't need to exist, it decimates you whenever it happens. So even if jam happens 25% of the time, that's devastating to EV, and it means that call is far better than raise. So your fold equity here, yeah, it's probably decent. And because Villain is more merged, you do have less showdown value than normal, but you've ignored the more important real life element there.
Yeah, that's the thing, because what I'm trying to say is Villain is betting a lower proportion of the pot as the hand goes on, if that makes sense. And so I think I know Fish and we can take this player as probably a weaker player. I know that weaker players aren't really thinking about sizing as much, but when they bet very small, I did feel like their range was capped and merged, if that makes sense, which did make me, I didn't think of all in. I'm not going to say that I thought of all in or whatever, which I thought would mean that they were literally just like capped and merged, and they didn't have much showdown, but I therefore want to, yeah, it's interesting.
You're not wrong in what you're saying. So like you're right, he is capped and he's merged, but that doesn't translate to the outcome that you want when you raise it. So like that's
normally when someone is capped and merged, do we normally want to raise more?
If the fold equity is higher than it should be and the EV of call is lower than it should be because they're not bluffing enough, then yes. But you can say that too generally, basically you're not getting into the dirt of it enough. You're not getting into the weeds of it enough when you just say there are more merge, therefore raise. You're being too broadly conceptual and not engaging enough with the true EV of what's going on, is what I would say. But yes, in some worlds there's a correlation there, but it's not 100% like causal necessarily.
Like, you have to be certain that raise is higher EV than call.
Right.
In a situation where you're in position, so you're not losing any value when you hit. You are low SPR, so you're most likely going to be able to get all the chips if you hit a club, or a deuce, let's say. And you're getting such a ridiculous price, right? You're getting 3 big blinds into 9 big blinds. It's like very, very difficult to say raise is better than call here when you have a hand like this.
So what kind of hands would we want to raise, if that makes sense? Like, where does this villains played this? We've called the flop, but we think they're more capped and merged than they should be.
Just raise all your queen X and raise king queen.
So it's more like
I would just be value heavy.
Yeah, you want to be really quite.
I would just be value heavy.
Yeah, you want to be really value heavy because for every semi bluff, call will be better than raise because of the SPR. There's not a single semi bluff raise you could have here that's better than calling because call is so good in position with the implieds, the future fold equity. Any fold equity you can get right now against the merged hand, you can probably also get on many river nodes. You have to remember that as well. You don't give up your opportunity to make pocket sixes fold here on loads of rivers by. What happens here if he has sixes is that you raise turn and he always calls or sometimes jams, but on many rivers he'll just check fold and you'll win anyway. So there is future fold equity, there is implied odds. Both of those things make raising inferior to calling in this particular spot with this SPR. And then the way you actually exploit the fact that villain is jamming too often, betting too many hands, is too weak here and merged here is to raise thinner for value. So when you have ace queen here, it's not optional, it's a mandatory raise, whereas it would be optional in theory, right? So that's the key. When you have a good queen or better, you actually have a pure value raise now, and by that same logic you should be able to infer that bluffing becomes worse. Not necessarily because the fold equity is lower, but because the EV is worse, and that's not just a function of fold equity, it's also a function of the form the non-folding takes. Does it take a raise form? Does it take a call form from villain?
So I know I'm changing the worlds up quite a bit, but it's interesting for me to talk through different scenarios. Let's say this was a hand where actually villain was full stacked and it was 100 big blinds. Is call still, because I know call is fine if that makes sense, but I was saying that because of the merge and cap nature, I think I want to raise more and all this type of stuff.
Right.
When and you rightly say, Pete, that because the SPR is low and maybe we don't know this type of player, maybe they're a bit more volatile with the SPR, they can shove.
Population will be in general more volatile with this SPR, they will shove more, we know that. We don't know what this human does, but we know that the sub pool that this human represents does shove more here.
Is that the deciding factor, or actually if he was full stacked and the SPR was normal, that actually call still performs better than raise, if that makes sense?
To figure his point, which is you don't need to raise, the idea there is that I would change the formulation of that. I don't like saying you don't need to raise because it sounds like you can raise. I would change it to call is too high EV for raise to be viable, right? So remember, raise is always competing against call. So when you have ace high, you have a really good bluff catcher, you have the sort of equity that's just fantastic, and getting 3-bet sucks. Okay, it doesn't suck as much as getting jammed on, but it still sucks. And fish are still volatile and will 3-bet you more than regs will. I think call is still better than raise, but it's by less of a margin than it is at this SPR. This SPR is like nail in the coffin. It's like sledgehammer to the EV of raise. 100 BBs deep. I think call is still better. I don't know if you'd agree, actually. I think call is still better.
Yeah,
but
I think
it's not as
better.
bad a deviation. It's not as big a difference as when you're at this SPR. SPR is the biggest factor, but no, it's not the only factor. And if it was, that would be a fucking coincidence, because in poker, everything's gradable. For something to be the only factor, I'm suspicious at that statement for any poker spot. If anyone says, is this the only factor? I would almost categorically answer no to every question of that in poker.
It's one of those things also, like, he's a weaker player, we're in position. Reopening the action leads to a branch that could negate our positional advantage. So I just don't want to do it.
Yeah, and another formulation of that is the call is even better in position than out of position. So call is very high. So raise is competing against a very high target. It's trying to clear a very high wall, jump over a very high wall. Figure, let me help you here a little bit, because I think you're confused. Rarely raising any nut flush draw on the turn is a terrible formulation, because what you're implying here is that you are sometimes raising a nut flush draw on the turn. You should never make a play that's horrific. Raising here is horrific compared to calling. It's a blunder. If you sometimes blunder, you need to take a good look at your game and say, why am I sometimes raising here? If you mean never, that's okay, but you should say that so that your brain doesn't get
I think he means
confused.
more generally across situations as opposed to this, if that makes sense.
Oh,
Like,
see,
he's
like, he's
basically saying across any situation.
Oh, but there are
he's
loads of
rarely
situations
raising.
where you should
There's
raise your
loads of
flush draws.
situations.
But
Right,
okay,
when you get
fair enough,
double,
if
when
that's
you
what
get
you
double
mean.
barreled,
Fair enough.
3-bet pot out of position, you want to be jamming.
You want to be jamming
a
a lot, yeah. Or
Yeah,
okay,
you'll
but
be
that's a
jamming a
different
lot,
SBR. But in a single
Sure.
raise pot where you just face a turn bet and you're out of
You want to
position,
be raising, yeah.
you want to be raising a lot because the in position player shouldn't be jamming much, right? Especially if there's just like one flush draw on the board. So yes, the point stands as a general one, but I thought what you meant here, and even if it's not your point, I still want to like harp on this because actually it's a huge deal. When students in general, not you, Figaro, maybe you didn't mean that, I misunderstood, but when people say you rarely want to do X because X is bad, it's like, no. If X is bad, you don't do X, period. You just don't.
Exactly.
It's like I don't wake up in the morning and I'm like, okay, I have two choices. I could drink this amino energy electrolyte drink, or I could try to like, I don't know, like eat the can. It's like, well, eating the can seems bad and dangerous, so let me only do that 14% of the fucking time. What a moronic thing to do, you know? So people do that in poker. I hear it, and I want to literally like slap them in the face every time I hear it, but it's key. Don't do things that are mistakes if you can help it, ever.
I do agree with your general attitude towards the game, Chris. Like I do think like being generally aggressive in these pools is going to be better than being passive. So like even though maybe we're saying, you know, this you kind of misapplied or you shouldn't be doing in this spot, like your overall attitude, I
agree, it's good. And the other thing is that you could be more specific. So when you say, let me raise more against a range that's more merged, what do you mean? Because you should raise thinner for value, but it's not actually clear that you should bluff more. Because it's not clear that through villain being more merged and having less air and more made hands, that your fold equity goes up. In fact, I don't think that's the case. I would guess your fold equity goes down there, and actually you should bluff less and value raise more. That's before we even get into the SBR part about getting 3-bet all in. All right, let's fucking win a stack. Let's go.
Let's go.
Yeah, let's win it. Let's win a
Fucking
stack
go,
where
boys.
no money changes hands, aces versus kings.
Over 100 viewers, guys. You're liking the stream today. So am I. We're all liking it. It's a great stream. We're going to clip it, put it on YouTube. Keto diet, fresh New Year resolutions, fresh Chris. Akshar's got cough. Seems to be making him a good streamer as well.
Well, when I'm ill, I'm less likely to get you banned from Twitch. So
that's good to know.
It's just like
low energy Akshar is safe Akshar.
So in this point, I think aces just have to check.
What I get for hyping up aces, we get a board like this.
Yeah.
Oh.
Let's just wait.
Akshar, no. Bad.
I wasn't going to say anything strategic. I was literally just going to say. I'll say what I'm going to say afterwards, but I'm going to keep my mouth shut.
So I think my size will be block if I have a value bet at all, and I think I do. I think their propensity of flushes is so low, and I just think. I mean, I'm betting very small on purpose, but. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I just fold is the answer for me. Where are aces?
I don't know. Like, am I being crazy? I'm really suspicious.
I have that thought a bit here. Yeah, let's look at this one a bit more. Let's look at this one. Okay, so
like, I don't know. Is that just like poker instincts or something? But
yes.
I feel really suspicious.
I've seen this before. I've won here. This doesn't quite add up. It's a bit out of the blue. It's something like that. I had the same thought. And my logical brain was like, yeah, sure, fold. And then like something in the back of my head was like, actually, if you call here, you'll win quite a lot. And I was like, where's that coming from, bro? Like, where's
that coming
where are you getting it from? So we'll get to that, right? Let's start with flop.
Yeah, let's get to it. Yeah, let's get to it. Yeah.
Bet flop here. Sorry, Chris, I missed it.
We bet flop. I bet.
Okay, fine. Sorry, so I think 753 monotone is actually quite good for you. 753 rainbow is pretty gross, but 753 monotone is pretty good. So yeah, this is a good board for your range. The idea is monotoneness or monotonity, whatever you want to call it, is the police. It basically reduces the suffering for a player that was suffering on a rainbow board and reduces the glee for a player that was gleefully conquering on a rainbow board. So 756, 754, 753, bad boards for your range by rank, so therefore rainbow-wise, where there's no negation of that rank, bad. But when you make it monotone, now you're the one with the big one spade hands, overpair one spade, ace king one spade, villain isn't. Now you have way more suited ace than him. You're just doing really well on this flop because it's monotone. So monotonity basically neutralizes advantages and disadvantages garnered by rank.
Then on the turn, I think I think I'm pure checking aces now. 4
flush is very good for your range. You probably don't have a value bet for any sizing. You could bet like 10% pot here or something, but yeah, I think check is good. Yeah. And then on the river, the idea is like you're not confined to block for 1/3. You're allowed to block whatever sizing you want, right?
Yeah.
So what do you think is better? 1/3, hoping that like 8's no spade pays it off, etc. Or you can even go a quarter or a fifth. You could feather here, as we
Well,
said.
I
CPS grade
B25. I do B25.
Oh, you did B25.
I think.
Okay, yeah, fair.
I think I B25.
You could also check, but I think check is, I don't know, actually. Let's throw this over to you. Like, the choice between like a really small block here and a check, like where do you sit on it?
Honestly, I don't know. Like, I think check call here is completely fine too. Like,
yeah, I mean, I think if you
that's why
10%
I like
flop, check call's really good. But because you bet bigger on flop, like if you
Bit
B10
bigger on the
flop,
flop.
it's definitely really good because you filtered villain a bit here. I'm slightly concerned that villain is not going to bluff very often against check. Against block, though, I think they're going to bluff way more often because they're going to feel like they can't call now. Like they
can't
can
call,
check
but they
or they're
can
being
raise
milked
you,
or something. I would pay this off, and the reason is I don't believe that they slow play enough of their good flushes on the turn. I don't think they have a lot of good flushes because they raise flop too often and they bet turn too often. So I actually think this is full of shit. Because I don't think a 6 high, 8 high, or 9 high flush is going to raise you here ever. And I don't think an ace high flush resists investing. So I think if you, again, Chris, the way you need to think about this is hand read. You're being way too general. I know why you're folding. You're folding because you're saying 4 flush, raise of river bet, under bluff node. Not here, because this is an exception. Let's engage with villain's true range. And then I think it's like, really, bro? Actually, I think I win 70% of the time or something here when I'm meant to win like 28. So now I'm kind of like,
what is this race? 26 into 77. So like,
yeah, I need like 27% equity to call, right?
Yeah, like
I think I have like 60 or 70.
I think you have a lot of equity here, which is so weird to say, like, because both of our instincts just flared up at the exact same time.
As soon as I saw his raise, my brain was like, fucking call this baboon. Like, don't let him away with this.
This guy is a stain.
But it comes from long-term range reading, right? And the problem with the general... your biggest problem, Chris, if I may be really brutal and frank here in poker, is that you use general vague principles way too often instead of engaging more specifically with what villain's range actually is. Hand reading is what you need to work on instead of falling back on general axioms. You're very good at the general axioms, it's just that here they don't accurately describe the way villain got here. You can't frame the spot in an accurate enough way without being a bit more specific. So here it's kind of like, what's he telling me he has? He's saying he has a boat or a good flush. Do I believe that he has a good flush very often and A, didn't raise flop and B, didn't bet turn? No. Do I believe that that it would be easy to overbluff here, given he only is meant to bluff 28% of the time? Yes. Therefore, I think I've got way more equity than I need, and I don't think this is close upon reflection. But when you stop before going into a specific enough level of thought, you actually don't open the door to hand reading at all. And then you have no chance of figuring out this specific spot. So hand reading is a skill, whereas axioms are objective knowledge and truth. And what you need to get better at is the subjective skill. It's you as the poker player and poker thinker and problem solver, more than you as the applier of things you've learned. I think you're doing a bit too much. Like, I remember in school there was knowledge and understanding was one criteria for like exams, and the other was problem solving. And you need to do less knowledge and understanding and more problem solving, more engaging with real specific things.
Well, let's have a think about what the range is that gets to this point. So villain calls the flop, checks back the turn, and then has a river decision facing block, if that makes sense.
Right.
And so I was sat here and I totally agreed with you guys to an extent that I feel like when they call the flop, they don't raise the flop and they check back the turn, they're more capped than they should be in reality. So the upper part of that value range is smaller than it maybe should be in reality. And I totally accepted that. What the deciding factor for me is that I would have felt that in order to be over bluffing this pool or this player, who I don't know, would be having to take almost pocket pair hands now and raising them.
That's basically what we're saying is happening too often. Because we think
that's
those hands got here too frequently, the way they've played so far, and can overbluff very easily if there's an absence of value. Remember, how easily villain can overbluff is in part a function of how many value hands are in their range, right? So if their range is drowning in value, it's harder for them to overbluff with those hands. So I agree that many people won't raise them, but people are very afraid. Like, compared to GTO, solver will look at this and be like, oh, cool, I've got sixes, let me mostly call. And sometimes I'll fold, and sometimes I'll raise, maybe. I don't know what it raises here as a bluff, but it might say something like that. Humans are less inclined to call because the idea of being value towned or milked or whatever by the block bet is way more scary to the human. They don't want to feel like a dunce and call and just see aces here. So they actually end up raising more often than the solver does with those combos. Now that's okay if they've got huge value range. Maybe they're still not over bluffing, but it won't take much here for you to get 28% equity. Remember, if you win a third of the time, you're printing by calling. It doesn't take much for them to be turning those hands into a bluff. Enough for that region to constitute a third of their range. Maybe 70% was a bit overzealous by me, but I do think 50-60% here
I think you have the way that we kind of just instantly thought this is probably like one of those rare overbluffed races in the river. Like I think we have like 50% plus equity here. Especially like you have to think like what is his real value range on the river? Like pocket sevens, pocket fives, pocket threes, and like some spade, ace of spades specifically that he didn't raise bet the turn. Like think about that in the sense that he's not raising here with like tens with a spade. Like humans don't go that thin for value. So like when you get into that, you're like, oh, okay, so he doesn't really have that many value combos. He could have like literally, I don't know, one bluff combo, and we know he probably has more than one that he over bluff already, you know? It's not an easy call to get to, and I'm not surprised that you folded here because it took me I didn't see the call when you were in the hand. I saw it as soon, and I saw the call like a few seconds after you folded. So it takes a bit of time to get to that conclusion. I don't blame you for that.
Yeah, I mean, I think votes are very, very normal here. I think villain could absolutely have pocket fives, and that's like what they're repping.
Yeah, that's fine.
I think I think
fives, that's fine, because we expect to win 50-60%. We don't expect to win all the time.
100.
We don't expect to win so often that seeing fives makes us reconsider. That's what Akshar was saying at the start of the stream. You don't want to actually just go, oh no, I lost, maybe I was wrong, let me question myself, let me paint myself in a light where maybe I'm failing and losing resources for me and my family. You don't want to do that. Might sound dramatic, but no, subconscious, that is what you're doing. You don't want to do that during the hand, so you call, you see fives, you're c'est la vie, okay, whatever. You know, it's fine. Your assessment didn't exclude fives. It did say that bluffing at the villain is bluffing lightly more than 30% of the time, and you've got a clearly winning call. That's all it has to say.
Well, that's the thing. I think that's where, in our thought processes, there was the difference, because it did come down to, and I appreciate I can't say all this in the moment, but it did come down to what I felt they were doing with their pocket pairs, if that makes sense. Like it felt, when they check back, I'm like, okay, I think they're more capped than they should be in reality, and I actually think I have a nice block bet here because they cycle with some stuff, and you know, I get to take them to value town, if that makes sense. But it is easy to raise with a boat now, and it is easy to raise with the occasional flush.
It's hard to have them. Hold on a minute here. This could be a fallacy. It might be easy to raise if you have it. It's very hard to have it given the way pool construct here. They'll raise their sets and they'll flop an absolute ton here at these stakes. Absolute ton. Akshar, what do you think?
No, way more than they should.
Way more than they should.
Main thing.
And sets are actually good raises on monotone boards anyway.
It's not like a bad raise.
It's not a bad raise, but I think they will do it lots of the time, because if you imagine the live player, the 25 NL weaker player or whatever, he's like putting you on a range, but in a kind of unsophisticated way. What does he think you have? A lot of like one spade hands, right? So with the set, very natural to raise. I think, Chris, again, I hate to say this because I say it to you all the time, but it comes down to streetwiseness and experience. And because you've not been around the block like me and Akshar, like we were like gang children. We like
I understand.
Like Akshar's younger than me, but I'm like a gang child that was like running about shooting guns at people. Poker metaphor wise, guys, not real life. My childhood wasn't that bad. From like 8 years old, and now I'm like 36, and I'm like, oh man, I've just seen this so many fucking times. I just know what's up. I'm so streetwise. Chris, you started playing poker 2 years ago, right?
Yeah.
That's why you don't have the same sort of spidey, tingly sense of like this is overbluffed as we do, and that means you have to be like super deliberate with a hand reading, and that'll take a while to come. That's fine. It's not a big deal, but yeah, calling is wildly winning here. I'm sure of it. If you enjoyed this coaching session, if this was the format that was to your tastes, do let us know in the comment section. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button as well. And of course, if you enjoy the way we teach the game and think about the game here at Carrot Corner Poker Education, then don't forget to check out our paid premium courses over at carrotcorner.com. We have the Carrot Poker School, our marathon, comprehensive theoretical slog through No Limit Hold'em cash game theory, and then of course Cash Injection, a 10-episode long mini course, only about 20 to 30 minutes per episode, teaching you some very quick fixes to your game, some exploits that are going to crush the competition and hopefully result in a big boost to your win rate without you having to do much work at all. Check out carrotcorner.com for those, and we will see you very soon for another video here on YouTube. Bye for now.